The sound of glass breaking was nothing compared to the gasp that filled the dining hall. Imagine the horror of being stripped of your dignity in front of everyone you know. Could you endure it? Evelyn Turner, dressed in pearls and pride, had just grabbed Grace, the quiet maid, and ripped her uniform right there in front of 20 elite guests. For a moment, the grand chandelier above seemed to stop glowing. Grace stood frozen, her hands shaking, her dignity torn with the fabric. And then Jack Turner rose from his seat, his eyes filled with anger. Grace was 28, a young black woman with a calm spirit and soft hands that had learned to work hard since childhood. She lived quietly, never drawing attention to herself. But inside the Turner mansion, her presence was felt. She cleaned, served, and kept her head down. But her grace, the very thing that gave her name meaning, did not go unnoticed. Especially not by Jack Turner. Jack, the millionaire heir in his early 30s, admired her from the moment she started working in the house. It wasn't just her beauty, though her dark eyes carried something rare. It was her patience, the way she endured sharp words without breaking, the way she treated everyone from gardener to butler with the same quiet respect. But admiration is dangerous when eyes are always watching, and the sharpest eyes of all belonged to Evelyn Turner, Jack's mother. Evelyn was a woman who carried power in every step. She had built her life on rules, wealth, and appearances. To her, the staff were not people with stories. They were simply tools, and Grace, no matter how humble, began to irritate her. It started small. "Don't walk so loudly in the halls," Evelyn snapped one morning, though Grace's steps had been light as air. "Another time when Jack complimented the table arrangement," Evelyn cut in. It was the florist's work, not the maid's. Grace always bowed her head, answering softly, "Yes, ma'am." But Evelyn noticed how Jack's gaze lingered on Grace, how his voice softened when he spoke to her, and that to Evelyn was dangerous. What if a mother's jealousy sparked a scandal that no one could forget? One afternoon, Evelyn's close friend Margaret Dawson came to visit. As Grace served tea on the terrace, Margaret's eyes narrowed. "She's rather pretty for a maid," Margaret whispered. Evelyn's face hardened. "Pretty?" She gave a short laugh. "She's ordinary, and she will never be more than help in this house." Grace heard the words, though she pretended not to. She placed the sugar bowl down gently, as if nothing cut through her heart. But Jack saw more than anyone realized. One evening, he stopped Grace in the corridor. "You don't have to take her." "Words," he said softly. Grace looked up at him, steady as always. "It's my work, sir. Words can't change that." But Jack's jaw tightened. "One day, I'll show you that you're worth far more than the way she treats you." Grace lowered her gaze quickly, knowing someone could overhear. Yet deep inside, a tiny warmth sparked, something she would never dare admit. The mansion soon buzzed with preparation for an upcoming dinner. Evelyn planned it with military precision. The guest list included wealthy families, business partners, and society's elite. Every fork was polished, every flower placed perfectly. To Evelyn, the evening was more than dinner. It was a stage to show her control. But to Grace, it was a test. Clara, the other maid, whispered as they laid the silver, "She's planning something, be careful." Grace only replied, "We'll do our work, that's all." Still, a storm was brewing. Evelyn had watched Jack watch Grace too many times. She needed to make a statement. Loud, cruel, unforgettable. The night before the dinner, Evelyn called Grace to the drawing room. The older woman's voice was calm, but her words cut deeper than any shout. "You may fool others with your quiet ways, but listen carefully. This is not your home. You are not family, and you will never ever think of my son as anything more than your master. Do you understand?" Grace bowed her head. "Yes, ma'am." "Good," Evelyn said, her eyes cold. "Because if you forget, I will remind you in front of everyone." Grace left the room with her heart heavy, but her steps steady. She told herself, it was only work, only another storm to endure. But storms, no matter how quiet, always break. And on that night of that dinner, under the glitter of chandeliers and in front of the city's most powerful families, Evelyn Turner would make her cruel move, one that would leave the entire house speechless. The night of the dinner came with the weight of expectation. The Turner mansion glowed with golden light, every chandelier blazing, every silver fork shining like a mirror. Outside, luxury cars lined the driveway. Inside, the hum of servants' shoes mixed with the sound of violins warming up in the parlor. Grace moved quietly through it all, her uniform neat, her face calm. She carried trays of glasses, double-checking every detail. On the surface, she looked steady, but deep inside, her heart pounded. Evelyn's words from the night before still rang in her ears. "If you forget, I will remind you in front of everyone." Clara brushed past her with a basket of bread. "Steady hands, Grace. We just have to survive tonight." Grace gave a soft nod. "We will." The guests began to arrive. Wealthy men in tailored suits shook Jack's hand and clapped his shoulder. Women in gowns swept into the hall, their laughter sharp and high. Margaret Dawson was among the first, draped in jewels, her smile wide but her eyes sharp. She kissed Evelyn's cheek and whispered something that made both women laugh. Grace stood near the entrance with a tray of wine. Jack caught her eye as he guided a couple inside. He gave her the smallest nod, a silent reassurance. Grace lowered her gaze quickly, remembering her place. But the warmth of his look carried her for the next hour. Dinner was announced and everyone filed into the grand dining room. The long table sparkled under the chandelier. White lilies filled tall vases, their scent rich in the air. Guests took their seats, servants moved swiftly, and Evelyn Turner sat at the head of the table, proud and composed. Grace's role was to serve the east side near Margaret Dawson and two other society ladies. As she poured wine, one of the women leaned close to whisper, but not quietly enough. "Such a pretty girl to be only a maid," she said. Margaret smirked. "Pretty things in uniforms can be dangerous." Evelyn's lips curved into a cold smile. She heard, and she did not correct them. Instead, her eyes cut across the table to Jack. He was watching Grace again. The first courses went smoothly. Grace carried trays, Clara passed bread, and Mr. Harris directed the rhythm like a conductor, but tension grew heavier with each passing glance. Evelyn noticed how Jack thanked Grace every time she poured near him. She noticed how his eyes softened whenever she bowed slightly, how his jaw tightened whenever someone mocked the staff. By the second course, Evelyn's patience had thinned. She leaned toward Margaret. "Watch this," she whispered. Margaret raised her brows, but said nothing. It happened in the middle of the main course. Grace stepped forward to serve a dish near Evelyn. Her hands were steady, her steps measured, but Evelyn's voice cut the air. "Stop!" The room hushed. Every guest turned. "Bring her closer," Evelyn said to no one in particular. Grace froze, unsure, then moved nearer to Evelyn's chair. The older woman's eyes were sharp as knives. 2 years in my house, and you cannot walk properly with a tray. Look at the way you stand like you belong here." Grace's heart raced, but she whispered, "I'm sorry, ma'am." Evelyn's hand shot out, gripping Grace's arm. Gasps rippled through the table. "You think because my son is polite to you that you are more than what you are. You are nothing but a maid." Before Grace could react, Evelyn yanked hard at the front of her uniform. Fabric tore. The sound sharp as thunder in the silence. Grace staggered back, clutching herself. The tray nearly slipped. The entire room froze, forks suspended, mouths open. Gasps and murmurs filled the air. Margaret Dawson's hand flew to her pearls. "Evelyn," she whispered, half shocked, half delighted. Grace's face burned. Tears stung her eyes, but she held them back. Her chest rose and fell with the force of her breath. All she wanted was to disappear, to sink through the floor. And then Jack's chair scraped loudly against the marble. He rose slowly, every eye turning to him. His face was calm, but his eyes blazed with fury. He took off his jacket and draped it gently over Grace's shoulders, shielding her torn uniform. His hand lingered protectively, steadying her trembling arms. "Mother," Jack said, his voice low but filled with steel. "That was enough." The silence deepened. "You humiliated her in front of everyone," Jack continued. "Not because she failed her work, but because you despised her presence. You went too far, Jack." Evelyn tried to cut in, but he raised a hand. "No. Tonight you've shown everyone in this room that cruelty, not class, rules your table, but not mine." Gasps spread across the guests. Some nodded faintly. Others looked down, embarrassed. Grace stood frozen, tears finally breaking free, but Jack's jacket shielded her. His words rang in her ears like a promise. Evelyn's face turned pale, her pride wounded deeper than she could cover. "You would defend her over your own family?" she hissed. Jack's reply was simple. "I am defending what is right. That is what family should stand for." The table fell utterly silent. Guests exchanged uneasy glances, unsure whether to speak or eat. Margaret Dawson cleared her throat, forcing a laugh that sounded brittle. "Well, what a passionate house. Perhaps we should enjoy dessert," but no one moved. The dinner had turned into something else entirely, a reckoning. Grace lowered her head, her voice barely a whisper. "Thank you, sir." Jack glanced down at her and said firmly, "You don't need to thank me for being treated as human." The words struck deeper than any insult Evelyn had thrown. Grace's tears flowed freely now, not of shame, but of release. The rest of the night passed in a haze. Guests excused themselves early. Conversations were hushed. Footsteps awkward. The chandelier still glittered. The lye eyes still perfumed the air, but the mansion no longer felt proud. In the servants' corridor, later Clara squeezed Grace's hand. "You stood tall," she said softly. Grace shook her head. "I only stood because he did," but in her heart, she knew something had shifted forever. Jack had seen her pain, and he had chosen to stand against his own mother for her. And while the house lay in silence, Evelyn Turner sat alone in the grand hall, her pearls still shining, her pride cracked. She had tried to tear Grace down in front of everyone. Instead, she had exposed the strength of her son's heart, and the whole house, every guest, every servant, was left speechless. The Turner mansion had never felt so heavy. The night after the dinner, silence spread across every hallway like a shadow. Even the staff, usually busy with laughter and whispers in the servants' quarters, spoke in hushed tones. Everyone had witnessed the moment Evelyn Turner ripped Grace's uniform. Everyone had seen Jack defend her. It was the kind of scene that could not be erased from memory. Grace sat alone in the small staff room, her head bowed, her fingers tracing the edge of Jack's jacket still draped around her shoulders. She hadn't yet returned it. The cloth smelled faintly of his cologne, and though she tried not to let her mind wander, she couldn't stop thinking about the way he stood for her. No one had ever done that before. Clara slipped in quietly and shut the door. "You're still up," she said. Grace looked up with tired eyes. "Couldn't sleep." Clara sat beside her. "You know what you showed last night? That you are stronger than all of us put together. She wanted to break you in front of them, but you didn't let her see you fall." Grace shook her head. "I almost did. If Jack hadn't." "He did, yes. But you held your ground, Grace. That strength was yours." Grace didn't answer. She wasn't sure if strength was what she felt. What she remembered most was the sting of fabric tearing, the eyes of the guests, the burn of humiliation. The next morning, Jack entered the kitchen where Grace was preparing trays. She froze when she saw him. He didn't wait for formalities. He walked up to her, his voice gentle but firm. "Grace, I'm sorry for what happened. You don't need to apologize." "Sir," she whispered, "it wasn't you. But it was my house, my family." His eyes softened. "It should have been safe for you here." Grace lowered her gaze. "I only came to work. Safety was never promised." Jack reached for the tray she was holding and set it aside. "I won't let her treat you like that again. Not while I'm here." Grace's heart pounded. "Sir, please. If you continue, she'll only get angrier." "She already thinks that I care for you," Jack finished. He didn't flinch. "She's right." Grace's eyes widened, but Jack pressed on. "I admire you, Grace. Not because of your beauty, though it's undeniable. I admire your patience, your dignity, the way you rise above insult without bitterness. That's rare in this world." Grace felt her throat tighten. She wanted to tell him to stop, to remind him of his place and hers. But the words would not come. Instead, she whispered, "People will talk." "Let them," Jack said simply. And then, as if fate wanted to remind them of danger, Evelyn's voice sliced through the air. "Jack." They both turned. Evelyn stood at the kitchen door, her face pale, but her eyes blazing. "Come with me now." In the grand sitting room, Evelyn faced her son with fury. "Have you lost your mind? You embarrassed this family in front of the city's most powerful people. You defended a servant over your own mother." Jack stood tall. "I defended a woman who was wronged." "You crossed a line. She is nothing, Jack. Nothing but a maid." Jack's voice hardened. "She is not nothing. She has more dignity in her silence than many of the people we seat at our table." Her hand trembled with anger. "You would throw away our name, our standing for her." "I would throw away nothing," Jack said firmly, "because love, respect, and kindness don't take away from a name. They give it worth." The words landed like stones. Evelyn's breath caught. She had never expected her son, always polite and obedient, to stand against her so directly. Word of the dinner spread quickly. By noon, whispers carried through the city how Evelyn Turner had humiliated her maid and how Jack had defended her. Some guests told the story with shock, others with admiration. The young Turner has a noble heart, maybe too noble. In the mansion, staff looked at Grace differently. No longer just a maid, she had become a symbol of quiet strength, of hidden worth. Nora, once sharp with her, now brought her tea with trembling hands. Even Mr. Harris, the old butler, gave her a nod of respect, as if to say, "You've earned your place." But Grace herself did not feel triumphant. She felt exposed, caught in a storm she had never sought. That night she prayed quietly in her small room. "Lord, I never asked for this. I only wanted to work. If there is a way through this, guide me." A week later, Evelyn called for Grace. The older woman sat by the fireplace, her pearls absent, her face lined with weariness. For the first time, her voice carried no sharpness. "Sit," she said. Grace hesitated. "I'll stand, ma'am." She studied her. "You think I hate you?" Grace said nothing. Evelyn sighed. "Perhaps I do. Not because of who you are, but because of what you remind me of. I built this life on rules, control, and class. Then you walked in with your silence, your patience, and, without trying, you shook everything. I never meant to cause trouble, ma'am. I know." Evelyn's voice cracked. "But Jack sees something in you that I cannot change. And last week when he stood against me, for the first time I felt powerless." Grace's hands trembled, but she steadied them. "I don't want power, ma'am. I only want peace." Evelyn's eyes glistened. And perhaps that is why he loves you. She looked away quickly, ashamed of the tears. Go continue your work. That evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the mansion gold, Jack found Grace by the garden steps. She wore her plain uniform, but his jacket still hung in her locker inside. He looked at her with the same steady gaze he had held at the dinner table. My mother may never accept us fully, but I don't care. Grace, I want you to know I won't let fear silence what I feel. Grace swallowed hard. And what is it you feel, sir? Jack smiled softly. That I love you, and that I always will. Grace's breath caught, her heart pounding like drums in her chest. She had no words, but the silence between them spoke louder than any. The Turner mansion remained grand, the chandeliers still glittered, the guests still came and went, but something had changed forever. The night Evelyn tried to tear a maid apart had become the night her son revealed the true measure of wealth. Not in money, not in pearls, but in courage and love. And though the world whispered about them, inside those walls, the truth was clear. Dignity cannot be stolen, and love cannot be silenced. If you were touched by this story, please take a moment to like this video, subscribe to Whisper Fable, and join us in sharing good stories that matter. Thank you for watching. We'll see you in the next.